March 18, 1861. The Leitrim Canal, County Leitrim, Ireland. Lockkeeper Thomas Brennan approached barge number 47 as dawn broke over the waterway. Concerned by the frantic barking that had echoed through the morning mist for nearly 2 hours. What he found would haunt him until his dying day. A small black and tan terrier stood guard at the stern of the empty barge, its teeth bared, refusing to let anyone approach. Between its paws sat a canvas sack, darkened with dried blood. When Brennan finally coaxed the dog aside and opened the sack, he stumbled backward, crossing himself repeatedly. Inside was the severed head of Patrick Molloy, a 43-year-old boatman known to every soul along the canal route. His eyes were still open, his mouth frozen in what witnesses described as a silent scream of recognition. The dog, Molloy's faithful companion Brandy, had been guarding his master's remains through the night, but the truth was far more terrifying than a simple murder on the waterway. Before we uncover the truth about the Leitrim Canal barge dog, 1861, the faithful terrier found guarding a boatman's severed head after a midnight murder on the waterway. Make sure to subscribe to Fear Sermon and ring that notification bell. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now, let's descend into one of Ireland's most disturbing historical mysteries. The year 1861 marked a period of profound transformation and tension across Ireland. The Great Famine's shadow still stretched long over the countryside, even 15 years after the worst had passed. The population had been decimated, from over 8 million souls to just 6 million. Emigration ships departed weekly from every port, carrying away those who could afford passage to America, Canada, or Australia. The Leitrim Canal, completed in 1820, represented one of the few sources of steady employment in the region. This narrow waterway stretched just over 16 miles, connecting Lough Allen to Carrick-on-Shannon and the River Shannon beyond. It was a modest artery of commerce in a country bleeding from economic wounds, but for the men who worked it, the canal meant survival. Bargemen lived a peculiar existence. They spent weeks at a time navigating the 16 locks, transporting coal, iron ore, and agricultural goods between the remote mining operations near Lough Allen and the market towns downriver. These men developed a reputation for independence, self-reliance, and a certain roughness born of isolation. They slept on their barges, cooked their meals over small braziers, and often had only their dogs for company during long solitary journeys. Patrick Molloy epitomized this breed of waterman. Born in 1818 in the townland of Drumshanbo, he had worked the canal since its earliest days. His father had been a lockkeeper, and Patrick knew every bend, every shallow, every temperamental lock gate along the entire route. He was a widower. His wife Mary had died of fever in 1854, and childless. His only family, as he often told fellow bargemen, was Brandy, a working terrier he'd acquired as a pup in 1858. Those who knew Molloy described him as reliable, if solitary. He kept to himself, rarely drank to excess, and was known for his punctuality. When he contracted to transport a load, it arrived on schedule. In the precarious economy of post-famine Ireland, such dependability was valuable currency. The winter of 1860-61 had been particularly harsh. Ice had closed the canal for nearly 6 weeks, leaving bargemen without income and restless. When the thaw finally came in early March, there was a rush to move accumulated freight. Molloy secured a lucrative contract to transport a load of coal from the Erigna mines to Carrick-on-Shannon, a 2-day journey that would earn him enough to live comfortably for a month. He departed from Battlebridge on the evening of March 16, 1861, his barge laden with coal, Brandy perched at the bow as always. Several witnesses saw him pass through the locks at Drumleague that evening. He seemed in good spirits, calling out greetings to lockkeeper Michael Gaffney. That was the last time anyone saw Patrick Molloy alive. The first signs something had gone wrong came at dawn on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, a fact that would later seem grimly ironic. Lockkeeper James Moran at Kilclare Lock reported that barge number 47 had passed through his station during the night without stopping to pay the toll. This was unusual but not unprecedented. Bargemen sometimes ran locks in the dark to make better time settling their debts on the return journey. What disturbed Moran was the dog's behavior. He testified later that Brandy had been howling like a banshee, a sound most unnatural from such a small creature. Moran called out to the barge, expecting Molloy to emerge from the small cabin, but received no response. The barge drifted through the lock on momentum alone, its tiller unmanned. Moran assumed Molloy had drunk too much celebrating the Saint's Day and was sleeping it off below deck. He made a note in his log to collect double the toll when Molloy returned. But there was something else Moran noticed, a detail he initially dismissed as a trick of the moonlight. The stern of the barge appeared to have dark stains, like someone had spilled a barrel of porter, he would later tell investigators. In the darkness, he couldn't identify the substance with certainty. The second incident occurred near Loch Sker at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning. A young couple, Seamus O'Rourke and his betrothed Bridget Kelly, had been walking home from a wake in Keshcarrigan when they heard terrible sounds coming from the canal. O'Rourke described it as the sound of something heavy being dragged across wood, followed by a splash, and then the most pitiful animal crying you ever heard. The couple hurried to the canal bank but saw nothing in the darkness except the silhouette of a barge gliding past, its navigation lamp extinguished. They heard the dog's cries growing fainter as the vessel moved away. O'Rourke later admitted he thought about investigating further, but the atmosphere was wrong somehow. The night felt dangerous, like something evil was abroad. The couple reported the incident to the Royal Irish Constabulary the following morning, but their testimony was initially dismissed. Constable William Riley noted in his report that the pair had been at a wake where poteen, illegal homemade whiskey, was liberally consumed. He attributed their story to intoxication and overwrought nerves. The third incident was witnessed by multiple people and could not be easily dismissed. At approximately 4:30 in the morning, residents of Dromod village, a small settlement along the canal, were awakened by frantic barking. Mary Connolly, a widow who lived in a cottage directly overlooking the waterway, looked out her window and saw barge number 47 drifting past. She recognized the vessel. Molloy had stopped at her cottage many times to purchase eggs and fresh bread, but something was profoundly wrong with the scene before her. The barge was listing slightly to starboard, suggesting uneven weight distribution. The cabin door hung open, swinging with the vessel's motion, and standing at the stern was Brandy. Illuminated by the first gray light of dawn, his coat matted and dark, barking continuously at something on the deck. Mrs. Connolly testified that she called out to Molloy several times, growing increasingly concerned when he didn't respond. She woke her neighbor, Martin Byrne, who retrieved a lantern and ran alongside the canal, trying to catch up with the drifting barge. Byrne managed to pace the vessel for nearly a quarter mile, calling out and waving his lantern. The dog acknowledged him, briefly turning toward the shore, and in that moment, Byrne saw something that made his blood run cold. The animal's entire front was covered in something dark, he told investigators. At first I thought he'd been rolling in mud, as dogs do. But then I saw his muzzle, and I knew it was blood, fresh blood. And the way he was standing, so protective-like, guarding something on the deck, I knew someone was dead on that barge. Byrne attempted to wade into the canal to reach the vessel, but the water was too deep, and the current too strong. He watched helplessly as the barge continued its ghostly journey toward Carrick-on-Shannon, the dog's barking growing fainter in the distance. He immediately reported what he'd seen to the constabulary in Dromod. This time, the authorities took notice. By 7 o'clock on the morning of March 17th, Constable James Murphy and 2 deputies were positioned at Hartley Bridge, 4 miles north of Carrick-on-Shannon, waiting to intercept barge number 47. They were armed with rifles, uncertain what they would find but certain that something terrible had occurred. The barge never arrived at Hartley Bridge. If this story is giving you chills, hit that like button and share this with someone who loves dark mysteries. What do you think happened on that barge during the night of March 16th? Let's discover what happens next in this disturbing case that would shock the entire region. Datus Brennan had been a lockkeeper at Kerrybridge Lock for 17 years. He had seen drownings, industrial accidents, and the occasional suicide along the canal. He considered himself hardened to the waterway's darker aspects. Nothing in his experience prepared him for the morning of March 18th, 1861. The barking had started around 6 o'clock. At first, Brennan ignored it, assuming a farmer's dog had gotten loose. But the sound persisted, growing more frantic, echoing across the water with an urgency that finally compelled him to investigate. He found barge number 47 lodged against the eastern bank, approximately 50 yards from the lock gates. The vessel had run aground on a shallow section, its bow buried in the muddy bank, its stern still in the water. Standing at the stern was a small terrier, its coat so thoroughly soaked in blood that its original coloring was barely visible. The dog's behavior was extraordinary. It alternated between desperate barking directed at the shore and gentle, almost tender movements toward something on the deck, as if trying to provide comfort or protection. When Brennan approached the bank, the dog's demeanor transformed instantly. Its lips pulled back, revealing teeth stained red, and a deep, threatening growl emerged from its small body. "I've been around working dogs all my life," Brennan testified. "This animal wasn't being aggressive for aggression's sake. He was protecting something the way a mother guards her young. He was telling me, in the only language he had, that I shouldn't come any closer." Brennan called for assistance. Within 30 minutes, Constable Murphy arrived with 3 deputies, alerted by a messenger from Dromod, who had ridden through the night following the trail of the drifting barge. The constable's first challenge was getting past the dog. Brandy refused to allow anyone aboard the vessel, launching himself at anyone who attempted to climb from the bank onto the deck. Finally, Murphy ordered one of his men to retrieve meat from a nearby cottage. It took fresh bacon and nearly 20 minutes of patient coaxing before the terrier finally, reluctantly, moved away from his position of guard. What they found beneath the dog's vigil would be documented in meticulous, horrifying detail. The canvas sack sat in a pool of congealed blood approximately 4 inches deep. The blood had seeped between the deck boards and dripped into the coal cargo below, staining the top layer of coal a rusty brown. The sack itself was of the type used for grain, rough burlap, tied at the top with hemp rope. Constable Murphy, his hands shaking despite his military training in the Crimea, untied the rope and opened the sack. Patrick Molloy's head had been severed cleanly, likely with a single stroke from a sharp blade. The neck wound showed characteristics consistent with an axe or heavy cleaver. His eyes were open, fixed in what multiple witnesses described as an expression of profound shock. His mouth was agape, and subsequent examination revealed that his tongue had been partially bitten through, suggesting he had been conscious during at least the initial phase of his death. But there were other details that transformed this from a murder into something far more disturbing. Molloy's head had been washed. His hair was damp and carefully combed. His face showed signs of having been cleaned with a cloth. Dried soap residue was found in his ears and along his jawline. Someone had taken the time, after decapitating this man, to groom his severed head as if preparing a body for a wake. The constables searched the barge for the rest of Molloy's body. They found nothing, no torso, no limbs, no additional remains of any kind. What they did find was evidence of violence so extensive it suggested a prolonged, brutal attack. Blood was splattered across the cabin walls in patterns consistent with arterial spray. A section of the deck railing had been shattered, with bloody handprints suggesting Molloy had gripped it during a struggle. Embedded in one of the wooden support posts was a tuft of human hair, subsequently confirmed through microscopic examination to match Molloy's. The coal cargo itself had been disturbed. Someone had dug into the pile, creating a cavity approximately 4 feet deep in the center of the load. This space was large enough to conceal a human body, and there were indeed traces of blood within it. But no body was found. The barge's small cabin revealed more mysteries. Molloy's personal effects, his pipe, his spare clothing, his small store of money amounting to 3 pounds and 6 shillings, remained untouched. His logbook sat on the narrow bunk, open to his last entry dated March 16th, departed Battlebridge 7 p.m., weather fair. Brandy killed a rat near Drumley Glock, good dog. On the cabin's small table sat 2 tin cups, both containing remnants of tea. Chemical analysis would later determine that 1 cup contained traces of laudanum, a common opiate tincture. The concentration was sufficient to induce deep sleep, but not death. Most disturbing of all was a message, written in what appeared to be Molloy's own blood on the cabin wall. He knew. 2 words, no additional context, no explanation. Brandy remained at the scene throughout the investigation, never more than a few feet from the sack containing his master's head, occasionally whimpering but no longer barking. When investigators attempted to remove the remains, the dog followed, refusing to be separated from what little remained of Patrick Molloy. Investigation into Patrick Molloy's murder became one of the most extensive criminal inquiries in Irish history to that point, revealing a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of regional society. Chief Inspector William Doyle of the Royal Irish Constabulary assumed command of the case on March 19th. A veteran of 23 years, Doyle had investigated dozens of murders, but he immediately recognized this case as exceptional. The calculated nature of the violence, the deliberate staging of the scene, and most significantly, the complete disappearance of the victim's body suggested a perpetrator of unusual intelligence and cold determination, he wrote in his initial report to Dublin Castle. Doyle's first action was to order a complete dragging of the canal between Battle Bridge and Kerry Bridge, a distance of approximately 12 miles. Teams of constables, using grappling hooks and weighted nets, spent 3 weeks searching the murky waters. They recovered rusted tools, discarded cargo, and the skeletal remains of a horse that had apparently drowned 2 winters prior. They found no trace of Patrick Molloy's body. The investigation then turned to Molloy's movements and associations. Doyle's team interviewed every lockkeeper, bargeman, and waterside resident along the canal route. A picture emerged of a man with few friends but no known enemies, whose routine life offered little obvious motive for such extreme violence. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The dog, Brandy, had been taken to the constabulary barracks in Carrick-on-Shannon, where he refused food for 3 days, remaining in a state of profound distress. Sergeant Thomas Quinn, who had raised hunting dogs all his life, suggested bringing the Terrier back to the canal towpath to see if he would indicate anything useful. On March 24th, Quinn walked Brandy along the canal route, starting from where the barge had been found and working backward. For the first 2 miles, the dog simply walked, showing no particular interest. But at a point approximately 200 yards from Drumleague Loch, Brandy's behavior changed dramatically. The dog began digging frantically at a spot on the towpath, whining and scratching at the earth with such intensity that his paws bled. Quinn called for shovels. 6 feet down, wrapped in sailcloth and weighted with stones, investigators found what they had been seeking: Patrick Molloy's body, or most of it. The torso, arms, and legs had been buried together, carefully arranged as if in a coffin. The body showed evidence of multiple axe wounds, suggesting a frenzied attack. But there were also careful, precise cuts, methodical dismemberment performed with surgical knowledge. The body's positioning revealed the killer's mindset. The arms were crossed over the chest, the legs were straight, feet together. Someone had attempted to provide dignity in death, even while committing an act of profound brutality. Analysis of the remains, by Dr. Michael Fitzgerald, the regional medical examiner, revealed several crucial details. Molloy had been drugged with laudanum before the fatal attack. His stomach contents confirmed the presence of the opiate. The killing blow was a strike to the back of the neck with a heavy blade, likely the same weapon used for decapitation. Death would have been nearly instantaneous, but the most shocking discovery came from examination of Molloy's hands. His right palm bore a distinctive burn scar in the shape of a cross, a mark of the Molly Maguires, a secret society of Irish laborers known for violent resistance against exploitation by landlords and industrialists. This revelation transformed the investigation. The Molly Maguires, while primarily active in Ireland's coal mining regions and later in Pennsylvania's anthracite fields, had established cells throughout rural Ireland during the 1850s. Their symbol was the cross, burned into the palm as an initiation ritual. Their oath demanded absolute loyalty and silence. Chief Inspector Doyle now understood the message written on the cabin wall. He knew. Patrick Molloy had been a member of the Molly Maguires, and he'd apparently discovered something or someone that had cost him his life. The investigation now focused on identifying other Molly Maguire members along the canal route. This proved extraordinarily difficult. The society's members were sworn to secrecy under penalty of death, and rural Irish communities in 1861 had little trust in British authorities. Even when murder was involved, progress came through patient, painstaking work. Doyle's team identified 3 other bargemen with the characteristic palm scars. Under intense interrogation, one of them, a 28-year-old named Fergal Cooney, finally broke. Cooney revealed that the Molly Maguires had been using the canal's coal barges to smuggle weapons, rifles, ammunition, and explosives, stolen from British military depots and destined for Irish nationalist groups preparing for potential rebellion. The weapons were hidden within coal shipments, with the coal itself providing both concealment and an explanation for heavy cargo. Patrick Molloy had discovered the smuggling operation by accident in early March 1861, when he noticed that his coal cargo weighed significantly more than it should have based on the documented tonnage. Investigating, he found rifles packed in waterproof fabric and hidden deep within the coal pile. Molloy faced an impossible choice. As a Molly Maguire member, he was sworn to support the organization's activities. But as a bargeman, he could face criminal charges if the weapons were discovered on his vessel. He was also, by all accounts, a man of rigid principle who disapproved of violence. According to Cooney, Molloy threatened to report the smuggling operation to authorities. The Molly Maguire leadership could not allow this. An order was issued. Molloy had to be silenced. On the night of March 16th, another Molly Maguire member, a man Cooney identified only as Seamus from Drumshanbo, boarded Molloy's barge under pretense of friendly conversation. He brought tea, spiked with laudanum. Once Molloy was incapacitated, Seamus struck with an axe. The decapitation and burial were intended as messages. The washed head represented respect for Molloy as a fellow Irishman, even in death. The burial with arms crossed suggested hope for Christian mercy on his soul, but the violence of the killing itself warned others against betrayal. Armed with Cooney's testimony, Doyle launched raids on 6 properties suspected of housing Molly Maguire leadership. In a cottage outside Drumshanbo, they found Seamus O'Dowd, a 41-year-old former soldier, hiding in a concealed space beneath the floorboards. O'Dowd's arrest created a sensation. He was a decorated veteran of the British Army who had served in India, a man of apparent respectability who ran a small farm. Yet in his barn, investigators found the axe used to kill Molloy, still bearing traces of blood that chemical analysis matched to the victim. O'Dowd initially maintained his innocence, but when presented with Cooney's testimony and the physical evidence, his resolve crumbled. He confessed to Molloy's murder, though he insisted he had acted to protect a cause greater than any one man. The trial began in August 1861 at Carrick-on-Shannon Courthouse, presiding judge being the Honorable Justice Richard Pennefather. The proceedings lasted 6 days and attracted observers from across Ireland and Britain. The case had become a cause célèbre, representing not just a murder, but the broader tensions between Irish nationalism and British authority. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence: Cooney's testimony, the axe with blood evidence, O'Dowd's palm scar proving Molly Maguire membership, and most dramatically, Brandy himself. The dog was brought into the courtroom, and when O'Dowd was instructed to stand, immediately began barking and growling, showing unmistakable recognition and hostility. The defense attempted to portray O'Dowd as a patriot acting in service of Irish liberation. They argued that Molloy's betrayal of the Molly Maguires constituted treason against his own people, deserving of death according to the society's own laws. This defense was deeply controversial, essentially asking the jury to legitimize vigilante justice. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Seamus O'Dowd was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death by hanging, but the case did not end there. In September 1861, Dublin Castle received an anonymous letter, later authenticated by handwriting experts as coming from a priest in the Drumshanbo area, claiming that O'Dowd was merely the executioner, not the planner. The letter named 3 prominent landowners as the actual Molly Maguire leadership, men who had ordered Molloy's death from the safety of their estates, while a working-class soldier carried out their violent decree. Chief Inspector Doyle attempted to investigate these allegations, but found himself blocked at every turn. The named landowners had connections to members of Parliament and influence in Dublin Castle. Doyle's superiors ordered him to close the case, declaring that O'Dowd's conviction represented justice served. Frustrated and morally conflicted, Doyle resigned from the Royal Irish Constabulary in November 1861. In his resignation letter, which was leaked to the press and published in the Freeman's Journal, he wrote, "Justice requires more than convicting the hand that held the blade. It demands we confront those who gave the order. When power protects the powerful from accountability, the law becomes merely the instrument of oppression it claims to remedy." Seamus O'Dowd was hanged at Carrick-on-Shannon Gaol on December 3, 1861. Witnesses reported that he showed no fear on the scaffold and spoke his final words in Irish. "Is fear gailed briste, na berla cliste." Broken Irish is better than clever English, a nationalist slogan. He was 31 years old. The Leitrim Canal murder resonated far beyond its immediate circumstances, revealing fault lines in Irish society that would eventually fracture into violence and revolution. The case exposed the existence of the Molly Maguires to British authorities in a way that previous scattered reports had not. Within months, the Royal Irish Constabulary launched a coordinated campaign to infiltrate and dismantle Molly Maguire organizations throughout Ireland. This led to dozens of arrests and several additional trials, though none captured public attention, like the Molloy case. The methods developed during this crackdown would later be employed against Irish nationalist organizations, including the Irish Republican Brotherhood. The legacy of surveillance, infiltration, and collective punishment that began in part with the Molloy investigation, would shape Irish-British relations for generations. The case also highlighted the moral complexity of the Irish struggle for self-determination. Patrick Molloy became a martyr to some, a man who chose principle over tribal loyalty, while others viewed him as a traitor who deserved his fate. This division reflected the broader tension within Irish nationalism between constitutional approaches seeking reform through legal means and revolutionary factions advocating armed resistance. Newspapers of the ERA were divided in their coverage. The Unionist Irish Times praised the conviction of O'Dowd as evidence that British law would protect all subjects, Irish and English alike. The Nationalist Nation newspaper, while not condoning murder, published essays questioning whether men driven to desperate acts by centuries of oppression could be judged by the same standards as those living in freedom. The Molloy case also changed the administration of the canal system itself. Security was dramatically increased, with additional constabulary patrols and mandatory inspections of cargo. These measures effectively ended the canal's use for weapons smuggling, though they also increased operating costs and contributed to the waterway's eventual economic decline. Ironically, the Leitrim Canal itself became a casualty of history. Competition from the expanding railway system and the high costs of security and maintenance led to its gradual abandonment. The last commercial barge traveled the canal in 1955. Today, portions have been restored for recreational purposes, but most of the waterway that was once Patrick Molloy's domain has returned to nature. The most profound impact of the case, however, was on public consciousness. The image of the faithful dog guarding his murdered master's remains became a powerful symbol, reproduced in ballads, poems, and eventually paintings. The story entered Irish folklore, often heavily romanticized, as a tale about loyalty transcending death. Several ballads were composed about the case. The most famous, The Barge Dog of Leitrim, was sung in public houses throughout Ireland for decades. Its final verse captured the popular interpretation. They murdered Pat Molloy for truth he would tell, and left his poor body where none could see. But Brandy the Terrier stayed faithful and true. Where masters prove false, the dog will still be. The case also influenced Irish literature. Samuel Ferguson, one of the era's prominent poets, wrote The Faithful Hound in 1863, using the Molloy case as the basis for a meditation on loyalty and betrayal during Ireland's troubled times. Perhaps most significantly, the Molloy murder demonstrated how individual tragedies become weapons in political conflicts. Both Unionist and Nationalist factions used the case to support their narratives. Unionists pointing to the barbarity of secret societies, Nationalists highlighting the desperation that drove men to such organizations. The truth, as always, was more complex than either narrative allowed. Modern historians examining the case have noted elements that contemporary accounts overlooked. The laudanum found in Molloy's tea suggests a mercy the violence of the killing contradicts. Was the drugging an attempt to spare Molloy unnecessary suffering, or merely a practical means to control him? The careful burial of his body, the washing of his severed head, these actions speak to conflicted emotions, perhaps regret or respect struggling with the perceived necessity of murder. What became of the key figures in the aftermath? Fergal Cooney, the Molly Maguire member whose testimony convicted O'Dowd, was relocated by authorities to Liverpool, England, given a new identity and a small pension. He lived there until 1883, working as a dock laborer, dying of tuberculosis without ever returning to Ireland. His betrayal, or his courage, depending on perspective, left him isolated from both communities. Thomas Brennan, the lockkeeper who discovered the severed head, never fully recovered from the trauma. He continued working at Kerrybridge Lock for another 3 years before leaving the canal service. He became a recluse, living in a small cottage on the outskirts of Drumshanbo, rarely speaking of that March morning. Chief Inspector William Doyle, after resigning from the Royal Irish Constabulary, emigrated to Canada where he worked as a private investigator in Toronto. His letters, preserved in the archives of Ontario, reveal a man who remained haunted by the Molloy case, convinced that justice had been incomplete and that the true architects of the murder had escaped accountability. And Brandy? The faithful terrier lived for 3 more years after his master's death, cared for by a widow in Carrick-on-Shannon who had read about the case and offered to provide him a home. According to local records, the dog never fully adjusted to his new life. He would often slip away and return to the canal towpath, where he would sit for hours at the spot where Molloy's body had been buried, as if waiting for his master's return. When Brandy died in 1864, The widow buried him near that spot, commissioning a small stone marker that read, "Brandy, a faithful friend." That marker stood until the 1920s, when canal renovations disturbed the area. Its current whereabouts are unknown. The broader implications extended beyond Ireland. The Molly Maguires, driven partly underground in Ireland by the crackdown following the Molloy case, re-emerged with greater strength in the anthracite coal regions of Pennsylvania, where Irish immigrants worked in brutal conditions. The organization's activities there in the 1870s would lead to another series of trials, infiltrations, and executions, a transatlantic echo of the violence on the Leitrim Canal. The case remains a subject of historical debate. Some scholars argue it represents the tragedy of colonialism, men driven to violence by oppression, then destroyed by the machinery of imperial justice. Others view it as a cautionary tale about how revolutionary movements can devour their own members, sacrificing individual lives for abstract causes. Perhaps both interpretations contain truth. Patrick Molloy was simultaneously a victim of the society that bred the Molly Maguires and a victim of the Molly Maguires themselves. His death occurred at the intersection of multiple forms of violence, colonial oppression, secret society enforcement, and the intimate betrayal of men he had considered brothers. What do you think drove Seamus O'Dowd to such a brutal act? Was he a patriot defending his cause, a murderer hiding behind political justification, or simply a man caught in circumstances that stripped away his humanity? And what of Patrick Molloy himself? Was his decision to potentially expose the weapons smuggling an act of conscience or a betrayal of his oath? Would you have made the same choice if faced with his dilemma? Leave your theories in the comments below. This case raises questions about loyalty, justice, and the price of principle that remain relevant today. If this exploration of Ireland's dark history affected you, subscribe to Fear Sermon for more lost chapters of true crime. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when we uncover another forgotten story. Remember, history's most disturbing truths often lie not in what we remember, but in what we've chosen to forget. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. See you in the next video, where we'll descend into another case that time tried to bury.